There's our slide. Okay, so as Veronica mentioned today, we're going to just cover the certification benefits, eligibility process for applying to the 8A program. So normally when we do this class in person, we kind of like to go around the room and see, who has government contracting experience. Are you a new business or have you been in business for a while and so on. So unfortunately, we don't have that benefit today. So if you have any questions, certainly about general contracting, I'll mention a few things. But if you have more questions, you can certainly ask those in the chat box and we'll cover them later. I'm not going to really cover any specifics other than a couple of little things that are just segues, if you will, into the 8A program. But 8A certification is one of 5 socioeconomic programs that are recognized by the federal government. So the 5 are, again, for those of you that are new into government, into federal contracting, we monitor goals and prime contracting activity by the agencies government-wide. Again, we monitor 5 different socioeconomic categories: small business, 8A program, HUBZone program, woman-owned small business program, and service-disabled veteran. So SBA essentially is the oversight agency. We monitor those goals and percentages of contract awards to those categories for Congress, and we turn in reports to them how we're doing. Incidentally, you can actually check out, we did just release FY19's actual numbers, and I think we had a record year this year in all of our categories. So SBA on our website, we do track those numbers, and we do supply that information to the agencies. So again, 8A program is the program for small disadvantaged businesses. We're going to talk about eligibility and what exactly that means to be both economically and socially disadvantaged. And with that, I will cover a few of the stats that I mentioned. So again, because we did just roll out FY19 numbers, nationally, we did pretty well this year. Let me get this off my screen. So in 2019, 8A firms were awarded around $18 billion in contracts. And in the program right now, give or take, depending on the timing of graduations and, people leaving the program, people coming into the program, there's roughly around 3,000 firms in the 8A program covering, just about every industry that you could probably imagine. In Nebraska, currently we only have 18 8A firms. So because of these types of presentations and outreach, and of course the things that Veronica and her team do to promote our programs, we are always looking for good certified firms. So hopefully some of you will be eligible once you've been through this presentation, because we're certainly looking to grow that number. Locally, for businesses in Nebraska that are certified, in 2019, we did about $230 million in federal contracts, so not too bad. And that equates to about half of the firms receiving those awards. Now we're going to talk a little bit about business development. So, you hear the 8A program called the 8A program often, but it really is, the full technical term is the 8A BD program, or business development program. And that's really what it is. It really is a business development program. So, about half of those firms received awards last year, but obviously I'd like to have all those firms receive awards, contract awards. So we're always looking at various business development efforts once you're in the program to increase your success and performance in government contracting. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. Okay, so what is the 8A program? So it's important to understand that there are regulations that sort of monitor or manage procedurally what this program looks like. There's basically 2 sections of the regulation that you would want to make yourself familiar with. And again, for those of you that are new, there are basically two regulations or two policies that manage sort of what we do as small businesses and contracting. The Code of Federal Regulation, or the CFR, is the policy directive for what you as a small business, and essentially what I as a agent of the government under the SBA, how we conduct ourselves. So what makes us eligible? What are procedures for what we do? What are the regulations over the activities and things that the small business does and SBA does? Conversely, the FAR, the Federal Acquisition Regulation, is essentially the regulation or the law that provides contracting activities and how they conduct business with you. How do they procure and purchase from small businesses? So those really are the two sections of the regulation that you would want to get to know. The CFR is really the first one. The things that I'm going to talk about today are really essentially laid out in the Code of Federal Regulation, which is just that screenshot down below. You can actually get it online now. We used to have to order these big books, but now it's all online at the eCFR, ecfr.gov. Section 124 is the section that provides the policy specifically for the 8A program. And then a little screenshot at the top is where you can find the FAR, which is at acquisition.gov. There's a lot of actually really good information at acquisition.gov, but particularly that's where you'll find the FAR. And when you get to the FAR, you have the various sections. And Part 19 is conduct with small businesses, and then 19.8 is the is the 8A program. So, being that said, Section 8A is really that section of the Small Business Act that was created really when SBA was founded in 1953. So we've had updates to the Small Business Act over the years, and incidentally, we've had some just recently regulation changes to the 8A program and more in the works, and we're going to talk about some of those changes as well. But really the three primary focuses of the 8A program are to help small disadvantaged businesses to really compete in the marketplace. So the idea is that we take you as a very small business and we look at developing your business in federal contracting so that by the time you graduate the program, you're successful enough that you can now go out and compete on your own in the marketplace. As I mentioned earlier, it really is to provide business development support. So it isn't just about contract awards. It's really about growing your business in various ways during your time in the program. And then again, it really is to prepare you for procurement, again, in various ways that we're going to talk about, and provide you other business opportunities, again, so once you graduate, you're really able to go out and compete on your own. So what is the program not? It actually is not a contracting program. The reason SBA makes that point is, we understand that most businesses that are interested in the 8A program come into the program wanting access to those 8A contracts. It is a highly sought after program for that reason. It is by law, a much more direct way to getting contract awards versus some of our normal programs. It's a lot quicker and a lot easier because of certain mechanisms in order to get to win contracts. So it is a very sought after program. However, you are never guaranteed a federal contract, which might sound obvious, but it isn't always the case. Depending on sort of the word on the street, so to speak, some people think that they're eligible for the program, therefore they get in, and then they just sort of wait for contracts to come to them. You are in no way guaranteed a contract in that manner. You still have to market your company, market your business to contracting agencies. Certainly SBA works with you and we help you with that. That is the primary function of a particular person within the SBA called the Business Opportunity Specialist, or BOS. You'll hear this term often. in the law. Actually, it's actually written into the law. And that person at the local district office works with the 8A certified firm to grow that business. So you get out as much as you put in. And again, as I mentioned earlier, it's really a 9-year program that provides you with support both on the management and technical side, again, with the really the ultimate goal of competing and winning contracts, again, so that you can graduate and go on to compete on your own. So a real quick few bullets about the program benefits, and we're going to talk about each of these as we go through this process. But the primary program benefits, again, as we know, or as I've mentioned, it will help you compete for both set-aside and sole source contracts. So we're going to talk a little bit about set-asides and what sole source looks like. Again, for those of you that are new, some of you that are maybe not new to government contracting will understand set-asides. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Sole source contracts, this is the only socioeconomic program of the 5 I mentioned earlier that can receive direct sole source contracts without competition. So that's the nuance. Other programs can receive sole source contracts, but it is a much harder path to those sole source contracts. It's kind of the opposite in the 8A program. So we're going to talk about that. Again, you'll work with a business opportunity specialist within the local SBA district office, which ours here in Nebraska is located in Omaha. If you are maybe from across the river in Iowa, they're managed out of the Des Moines area. But we're here in Omaha for Nebraska. Another big benefit is you can form joint ventures within approved joint ventures within the 8A program to compete for work, and also including through SBA's Mentor Protege program. So we'll touch a little bit on that. And again, as I mentioned, it's a business development program. So it's not only working and creating strategies to grow your government contracting experience and contract awards, but there's all types of other management and technical assistance that we provide to our 8A firms throughout their tenure as well. So what is the tenure? It's a 9-year program. So barring any things that change within your business throughout those 9 years, if you grow substantially the way sort of on the the timeline that you are supposed to grow, you will graduate in 9 years. So it is a true 9-year business development program. It's sort of broken into 2 stages. The first half, or the first 4 years, is the development stage. That is really when we're taking a more aggressive approach, honestly, in looking at growing your business. I will say, though, as a caveat, the majority of businesses, it depends on the type of business you're in, certainly, and maybe what foothold you already have in the federal marketplace, agencies already knowing you and so on. But it usually takes an average of about the first 2 years in order for an 8A to receive their first contract. Again, depending on your level of experience when you come in. So really, years 3 and 4 are usually your most aggressive years in the development stage. And then by the time we hit your transitional stage, by years 5 and 6, and even year 7, you've hit a level of growth where you're really starting to now transition out of the program. And that's important because as you hit your transitional stage, we're not only creating a strategy, but also looking at compliance with the program. We're looking at how do we transition you slowly out of the program so that, again, by the time you graduate, you can go on and compete for other types of contracts. Because once you leave the 8A program, your 8A contracts don't go with you. So, well, I should say, for the length of the contract that you were awarded while in the program, you will be able to complete those. But once they're completed and you graduated, you can't you cannot be awarded those contracts. They actually stay in the 8A program. And of course, we don't want you leaving in year 9. You lose if you're at 100% 8A contracts, and then suddenly those come to an end, and now you don't have any contracts. And potentially you could run into some issues. So we're working with you, we're building a strategy to look at how do we slowly transition you out so that by the time you hit year 9, you're about 50-50 8A, non-8A revenue. There are, within that 9 years, there are, I mentioned, conditions to leave the program. So you could, again, just graduate on time. You go the full 9 years, you graduate, at the end of that 9th year. Throughout your tenure in the program, you could early graduate, voluntary withdrawal, or voluntary early graduation. So depending on the situation, you may have grown too large. Let's say you win several big contracts and it makes you a large, an other than small business anymore. So you may graduate for that reason. The success of the individual may have changed. So you may need to early graduate for some reason, and these things do happen. Or the 4th bullet, which is just termination. If something, problems arise or you do things that are fraudulent or outside of the purview of the program, you could be terminated as well. I will mention this later, but in this slide too, we mention each year of those 9 years, you will have to submit what we call an annual review. So we re-look at, it's sort of what I would just call a mini version of your application, where we monitor compliance in the program. You turn in a business plan in the beginning of the program when you're certified, and then throughout those 9 years we do an updated business plan. So again, we're monitoring where is your business going, are you evolving to different types of industries and different types of work, and then again, there's always that compliance piece as well to make sure that you're still complying with the program, and we do that on your anniversary of every year. Essentially, I'll mention here as well, when you do first come into the program, you get certified and you first come in, we do review that business plan with you pretty thoroughly to see where you're headed. And as part of that, we do a full orientation. So you will know, for this purposes of this, hour-and-a-half class, we're just summarizing a lot of these things. But if you get certified, you will sit down with me and a PTAC counselor, and we will go through your business plan, and we'll really look at where, what is the strategy, what is the path, where are you headed, what types of agencies do you want to work with, and so on. And you do that through a full sort of 2-hour orientation. Okay, so the meat of the program is what makes you eligible, and that's going to be the majority of what we talk about today. There are essentially 5 things for eligibility. Specifically for the 8A program, first and foremost, you have to be in business at least 2 years. So the other 4 socioeconomic programs, there is no minimum amount of time to be in business. You start your business today. Let's say you're woman-owned, for example. You start a woman-owned small business today. You can essentially be eligible tomorrow to compete for woman-owned contracts. 8A program's a little different. You do have to be in business at least 2 years, and you do have to have some revenues in your business. There's no, set dollar amount, but you do have to show some revenue and some diversity of revenues in your business. However, there is a but to that. If you haven't been in business at least 2 years, you can apply for a waiver if you can meet certain criteria. Essentially, what a waiver allows you, just to use construction because it's sort of an easy industry to kind of understand, but if you start a construction business, you just started it, 6 months ago, and you want to apply for 8A because you've had some good successes, but you haven't met the 2-year criteria, you could apply for the waiver if you can show, for example, you have been in construction, for your last 20 or 25 years of your career, potentially, working for someone else. And you can talk about your experience in that field, or, again, any field. If you can show substantial experience in the field, you may be able to apply for the waiver to get in prior to the 2 years. But generally speaking, you do have to be in business at least 2 years. Thus, as I mentioned, you do have to show revenue, so you will have to turn in that proof through showing, turning in your business tax returns. You must be a U.S. citizen. That's actually all of our programs. And of course, you must be a small business. So we review your size. and that is with all programs as well. Specific to the 8A program, again, I mentioned this earlier, it is a disadvantaged program. You must be both socially and economically disadvantaged. So we'll talk about what that means. Ownership, control, and management are very important in all of our programs. So if you are the disadvantaged individual, or there is more than one disadvantaged individual in which eligibility will be based, you have to show ownership and control by those individuals, and we'll talk about a little bit about what that means. You have to show demonstrated technical and management experience, so we'll talk about that. We do also review good character, and then you have to have potential for success, which is really, it's the terminology we use in the regulation is potential for success, but it's really, what is your marketing plan? What is your plan to sustain and be a sustainable business into the future? So we're going to talk about all of those. So we'll talk about size real quick. Again, this is only for my new businesses or individuals on the call. So you do, of course, have to make sure you are a small business first. So before you even look at the 8A program, you'll have to do some things where you get registered in the SAM.gov database to do work with the government, and you'll have to select your North American Industry Classification System codes, or NAICS codes is what we call it. And there's a real strategy really around selecting your NAICS codes as well. If you only do one specific thing, then it may be easy for you. You have only one industry code that you use, and that's the only one. But depending on the diversity of your business, you may have more than one. So it'll be important to work with PTAC and work with a PTAC counselor to determine what your NAICS codes are. And then, of course, you'll need to make sure you're a small business. In terms of applying to the 8A program, you can bid on work as a certified firm, essentially in any code that you do work, but you are monitored based on a primary NAICS code in the program. So you will have to select a primary NAICS code, which is generally where you derive your greatest revenues. And that's the primary code you will select for the program. And your size each annual review is determined based on that. For eligibility in the program is based on that primary NAICS code. So you will have to select a primary code, but again, you'll do work probably in more than one code. A couple of websites for you if you want to review this on your own, if you haven't already. NAICS codes are managed and monitored through the Census Bureau, and that's just because NAICS codes are used by the government for a lot of different economic factors. But we, again, use them to determine size standards for federal contracting. So you can go out to census.gov and do a little bit of research on your own. You can search by keywords. If you're not sure what your codes are, throw in some keywords, see what pops up. It'll give you kind of a little short summary about that code, and then you can try to determine whether or not that code might apply to you. Again, you may have more than one, although for most small businesses, we would never suggest more than, at the absolute max, probably 5 codes, again, depending on what you do. And then secondly, you'll want to look at our table of size standards that we keep on SBA.gov's, our SBA website. It is updated periodically, so you'll want to always make sure you go back and review that, but you will want to look at your size standard based on your NAICS code. What I will mention, sizes from a revenue standpoint, let me look real quick. Oh, I did include, okay. So I did include a snapshot, or this is just a screenshot of what the table of size standard looks like. Again, it's organized by NAICS code. It is a PDF document. It's organized kind of numerically by 6-digit NAICS codes. And then you'll be able to see the corresponding size standard. Just real quickly, size standards for revenue-based codes is normally based on a 3-year average revenue. So we've always looked at size standards over a 3-year average revenue because SBA determined we wouldn't want to necessarily penalize a small business if they had one good year or really one bad year. So we would really look at you over the prior 3 years to look at your size standard. I don't have a slide on this, but we actually just had an update to the regulation. Right now we're sitting in this flux period, if you will. It's going to end here pretty soon. We will be moving to a 5-year average revenue in January of 2021, which really is a major update in size policy in a number of years, actually going back as long as I can remember, and I've been in government contracting for a long time. So it's actually going to keep small businesses small longer. So it could potentially, there's pluses and minuses, but it could potentially benefit you to stay small longer so that you can, compete for small business work. But right now, we're kind of in this flux period. The SBA determined they wanted to give small businesses a longer term to transition. So as of right now today, you can actually follow a 3-year or a 5-year size standard, depending on the type of work you're pursuing. So you can look at either. With, again, in January 2021, we'll go to a 5-year size standard. So just something to keep in mind. But as you can see by this table, our size standards in government contracting are pretty generous. So most really small businesses can stay small businesses for quite some time. If you're in, I think I screenshotted construction. If you're in the if you're in the construction field, you can go upwards of $33 million in average revenue and still be a small business. I think in some of the IT sectors, we go up to 36 million. So very generous size standards. If you're in the wholesale, retail, supplies, trades, those are actually based on number of employees. So we would look at number of employees to determine your size. Those can range anywhere from 100 employees to be small, again, depending on the industry, up to 500 employees, depending on the industry. So again, just a general overview. If you have more questions about that, you can ask as we have time at the end. But certainly, and I'll mention this throughout, just make sure you're working with PTAC and a PTAC counselor because they can really help you sort of think through this process. One thing I want to mention specific to the 8A program is affiliation. When determining size, there's a whole section in the regulation about affiliation. It can get very tedious and lengthy in its definition. But I just want to give you a general summary of affiliation. But again, this is something offline we could talk to you about on an individual basis if there's something specific to your business. But when looking at eligibility in the program and looking at size, you may potentially run into an issue of affiliation, meaning you're affiliated to another business. If you're determined to be affiliated with another business, essentially they aggregate your total revenues and it could potentially put you over the size limit. So for the purposes of 8A, what are we talking about? There are issues with affiliation. Just to keep in mind, these are the sort of the 4 areas: contractual relationships that you might have, prior relationships with other businesses, sometimes as a spin-off business, so to speak, could have potential issues. Family ties, so you and your brother both own businesses in exactly the same industries. You may share work. So again, that could be looked at as affiliation. And then common investments. So if you have an investor that invests in your company that may have investments in similar industries, that could cause a potential issue. I don't want to send any alarms. This does not cover most people. Most small businesses don't run into these issues, but it's just important to understand it. So if you do have this happening in your business, if there is something interesting, again, once you decide to apply, read this section of the regulation or contact me or PTAC and we can kind of walk you through this, again, based on your individual situation. Okay, so that's size. So real quick, the social disadvantage. The social disadvantage portion is pretty simple. You are considered automatically socially disadvantaged if you are a member of one of these 5 groups. So if you are Black American, Hispanic American, Native American, or the 2 types of Asian American, subcontinent or Asian Pacific, you are automatically considered a socially disadvantaged for this program. So you just have to show proof of your nationality, and you can essentially check the box that you're socially disadvantaged. If you're not a member of one of those groups, it doesn't mean that you're automatically not allowed into the program. So if you're a person who is not a member of one of those groups, through your narrative and what we call preponderance of evidence, you may be able to prove that you are also disadvantaged based on some underlying factor. So some type of discrimination that you may have encountered throughout your life. And this just is stated right from the regulation. The applicant must have personally suffered from that disadvantage, meaning you wouldn't be able to provide a narrative that says, overall, all people, generally speaking, in this particular group are disadvantaged. It has to be something that you've personally suffered. It has to follow what we call both chronic and substantial, via your proof. And it must have negatively impacted you in your business advancement or employment. So again, depending on your particular situation, my advice would be to, if you're not a member of one of those groups, but you think you may have run into an issue, it's certainly something we can speak with you about offline on your specific situation and work with you to help you create your narrative so that you can potentially apply. I will say in the past, two of probably, just to give you examples, two of the sort of bigger ones that we've seen are people with certain physical disabilities. So if you may have suffered something from a physical disability, maybe it's military related or other, or particularly women, potentially in the past, women in the military who have been able to prove personal discrimination, just as examples. And I should say, as part of that, women used to be on that list. As we all probably know from the way a long time ago, women were considered a minority. Women are not minorities anymore. So just being a female in and of itself doesn't make you automatically socially disadvantaged. But certainly if you suffered some type of discrimination, maybe in the workforce, maybe you've worked or own a business that's in a male predominant industry, or again, maybe something in the military, just again, as an example, you may still be eligible. So it's just about working through your narrative and working with us one-on-one, and we can talk about your situation. So just a little bit about some of the evidence. If you are not a member of that group, this is just a list of some of the things that you can supply as part of that evidence of where you can prove discrimination. If it's been in your education or in your business, you've been turned down for certain jobs, you maybe thought you got paid less than someone for a situation. So you just want to describe that particular instance or situation. Certainly if you can provide actual evidence that you can submit. I think I have that here, yeah. So if you have affidavits or sworn statements from individuals who had direct knowledge of your discrimination, you can certainly submit that information. And it can be submitted anonymously within your application. You don't necessarily have to name names. But these are just some of the examples: rejection letters, denials on credits. Maybe you had something specifically said to you in a situation that you want to quote, things like that. So again, just know that there are opportunity for people who have not, again, that are not part of those automatic socially disadvantaged groups. And again, we can help you through kind of your individual situation. The economic disadvantage piece, so you have to, again, be both socially and economically disadvantaged. The economic disadvantage is a little more sort of the black and white because it's just based on the numbers. So you as an individual, it's based on 3 criteria: your net worth, your personal income, and your total assets. So first of all, net worth. After excluding, it's actually considered your adjusted net worth. So what is adjusted net worth? It's your personal net worth after we exclude both your equity in your primary residence and your ownership interest in your business. Once we exclude those numbers, that gives you your total net worth, and that cannot exceed $750,000. Now, the reason I have it this way is the net worth criteria just increased on July 15th. This is a major change in the 8A program. Prior to July 15th, that net worth eligibility couldn't exceed $250,000. $750,000 was actually the increased net worth for continuing eligibility once you were in the program, because we did allow for some, success and growth while you're in the program. But now it's actually $750,000 for initial eligibility. And also what that has done, just as a side note, that's also made both the 8A program economic disadvantaged and incidentally the woman-owned economic disadvantage the same. The SBA legal group sort of looked at both programs and said, well, why would we have different economic disadvantage eligibility criteria for one than the other? If you're economically disadvantaged, you're economically disadvantaged. So they wanted to bring those two programs up to be the same. So incidentally, if you're 8A, if you decide to get 8A certified, and you do, and you also are woman-owned, your 8A certification would serve as your certification for woman-owned. But anyway, those two are the same now. So we've brought those programs up to be the same. So $750,000 for net worth, adjusted net worth. And again, any equity you have in your primary residence. So you will include all of your financial documentation. SBA will then do the calculations that pulls those numbers out. But just again, if you're at home and you're thinking about looking at all the numbers and thinking about applying, this is sort of how you would, put it down on paper. Take out your equity in your primary home, and again, any ownership interest in the value of that in your business, and that gives you your adjusted net worth. It's important to know that if you've had any assets that you have transferred to an immediate family member within the last 2 years, we actually do take the value of those assets and put those back on you. But I'll talk about that in a second when we get to assets. So again, second criteria is your income. It's based on your AGI, your adjusted gross income. That cannot exceed $350,000. That is an average over the last 3 years. So it's a $350,000 AGI over the average over the last 3 years. Again, that was also increased from $250,000 that became effective in July. And then your total assets, which also increased from 4 million to 6 million total asset value. So for initial eligibility, which again would be the same as continuing eligibility. So again, we looked at your net worth. We excluded a few things. For your total assets, those things get included back in, and then we look at the total value of all your assets. That's important. Excuse me. That's important because, again, I mentioned any assets that you have that have been transferred to an immediate family member, we will attribute those assets back to you when looking at your total asset number. And again, that's just for initial eligibility. Sorry about that. I didn't want to cough in everyone's ear and I was choking on something. Okay. Retirement accounts, that is an exception. We will exclude any retirement accounts you have, particularly depending on the type of retirement account, whether or not you have access to that money or you don't have access to it. Most traditional retirement accounts, you don't have access to those without penalty. So we will exclude those. But again, that's information that you will include and we will exclude from that. Personal income, I'm not going to get too heavy into all of this. I just want to give you some general things to think about. Again, if you really think this is a program for you and you think you may be eligible, you'll certainly want to sit down with me or with Veronica at PTAC to talk about your situation if you want to. But just giving you some general information about things that are included or excluded. I don't want to get too in the weeds necessarily, just giving you some things to think about. but again, looking at your personal income, some individuals or businesses take an income to be able to pay taxes or reinvest back into the business. So you may do that, and in a normal situation, if you take that distribution, we may count that as income. But if you can prove you have, again, paid corporate taxes, or you use those monies to reinvest back into the business, we exclude that from income. So just another exception to think about. Okay. So those are basically the 3 economic criteria. So again, if you have a strange or specific situation to you that doesn't fit under that, certainly let us know. How do we look at spouses? You will have to turn in information about your spouse no matter what. However, we only include your spouse in determining your financial situation if they have some role in the business, or they've lent money to the business, provided some kind of credit support, or so on. If they haven't, and of course they have no ownership. So when I say role, that's whether or not they have a important, key role in the business or ownership. But if they don't have that, you're 100% owner of your business, your spouse is over here doing his or her thing. We will include, we will include their information, and you will want to include their financial information. It will be excluded from looking at the numbers for you. But it is important to include your spouse, because depending on where you live, for example, if you have an asset like your home that is a joint ownership, we will want to look at that so that we can exclude 50% or half of the ownership in that home, for example, 50% to them, towards them, 50% towards you. So it does actually, in some cases, helps you if it is a joint asset. We won't put the total value of that asset on you. We will, essentially split that in half. So that's why we want to see information about your spouse as well. So again, I guess I've mentioned most of these things. You're going to report all of these things in Certify. You will provide aging financials, things leading up to financial statements, leading up to sort of whatever point you apply. Just make sure that you don't submit anything over 30 days old. Some people will start to apply for the program, get busy, and come back. So you want to make sure everything's up to date. Don't sign anything or put anything in there that you then leave it sit for a year, and then you want to come back and sort of finish the process. Make sure there's nothing in there dated, of course, except for your financials that you're showing, your fiscal year financials, but make sure there's nothing in there dated past 30 days. Again, separate information for you and your spouse. And then you'll want to make sure you provide all your terms and restrictions for any of the assets that you have. And again, as I mentioned, SBA behind the scenes does all the calculations for any of the exclusions that occur. Just make sure you do include them. Sometimes Veronica and I both will get calls from individuals applying saying, well, should I include this? Should I include that? 99% of the time, we're going to tell you yes, include it. Let SBA eligibility office make the determination of whether they need it or not. It's better to include everything and let them determine what they don't need, versus if you leave something out because you didn't think it was important, and then subsequently in their research they find out about it, and then they question, well, why didn't this individual include that documentation or include information about that other business or that other asset? And then all you're doing is delaying the process, because now they have to go research and find out what's going on. So, a lot of times people will have maybe a second or third business on the side that's just a shell business, or it doesn't really do anything, and they think, I don't need to include it because it's not doing anything, it's just sitting. Well, they don't know what they don't know, right? So if they do research and they find out you do in fact have ownership in this business, even if it's not doing anything, they're going to stop the process, come back to you and say, why didn't you include this? What's going on with this over here? So you don't have a page limit with this particular process. So again, always better to include everything and let them determine what they don't need, versus them raising red flags. Why didn't you include it? So, okay, the other piece was ownership. So pretty straightforward. You have the the person in which eligibility is being based, so that socially and economically disadvantaged person or persons, so you may be owned by more than one, maybe you're 2 or 3 Black American or Hispanic American come together and own the business. So any of the disadvantaged individuals combined have to have at least 51% ownership. That's both unconditional and direct. No conditions on that interest can be held by any non-disadvantaged people. So your articles of organization, your articles of incorporation that you're providing and turning in as part of your application will have to show that there are no conditions being placed on your ownership and your control, meaning someone else could take control of your business. So that's pretty much just there. And then I have bullets here again. It's sort of dependent on the type of business that you have, whether you're a partnership, an LLC, or a corporation, what type of document you would have to turn in. So one of the handouts that I turned in, or that Daniel and Veronica provided on the webinar, is the application checklist, which I am going to go into that a little bit towards the end. Is very specific on, again, depending on the structure of your business, what types of documents do you need to turn in. This is just a summary list, but certainly when you get to the checklist, it'll give you more detail, again, depending on how you're legally structured on what you need to turn in. Control, right out of the regulation. So again, everything that I'm talking about, there is a section within that CFR 124 that covers each of these areas. So you would be able to, if you wanted to, you could go in and look at the regulation as well if you wanted the exact terminology. I don't always pull out the exact terminology. I kind of help summarize some of that legal jargon, but this one I actually pulled out of the regulation because I think it's very important. Essentially, what is control? It is not the same as ownership, although both may reside in the same person. In the case of this, they normally should. But SBA regards control as including both the strategic policy setting, which is exercised by board of directors in some capacity, and the day-to-day management and operations of the business. So you as the individual, generally speaking, have to show that you set policy and manage the day-to-day operations. And I'll get a little bit more into that. So what does that really mean? This is a bulleted list of things you need to think about as the disadvantaged individual when it comes to control and ownership. So you must be the highest compensated individual and you must hold the highest position. So again, usually, CEO, president, that kind of thing. Now there is a caveat to the highest compensated that we've run into. So depending on the type of business you are, you may actually pay, particularly if you're in a highly technical field, and in order to hire potentially maybe the highest quality or highest level individuals that you need, let's say it's something in the medical field or in the IT side of the world, you need people in the business that hold certain criteria. You may in fact actually pay some of those people a higher wage. That's actually okay. You just have to make sure that you detail that information in your application. So there are some caveats depending on the industry, but generally speaking, you're the highest compensated and you are definitely, you have to hold the highest position. You must be full-time in the business. And again, you must have the daily management and operations of the business. So you really have to be full-time in the business. What does full-time mean? Kind of that sort of middle, kind of smack in the middle, the middle bullet. Devoting full time to the business during normal working hours. So the regulation in the law says normal working hours are considered, generally speaking, 8 to 5, Monday through Friday. And the reason that they put that in there, because some people could come back and say, oh, I do work full time in the business. I put at least 40 hours towards my business. I just happen to do it on nights and weekends. That isn't considered normal working hours, generally speaking. Now, the caveat to that would be normal working hours of firms in the same or similar line of business. So if you're in an industry where, you know, for whatever reason, normal working hours go outside of those time frames and you can show proof of that, okay, then you may be outside of that normal working hour. But to say that you hold a full-time job over here, but then you also devote at least 40 hours to your business on nights and weekends over here, will make you ineligible. The idea there is, if you're going to, take this program seriously, grow your company within the 8A program, it really isn't necessarily a program you can do on nights and weekends, especially if you win large contracts, which, ultimately is what you're hoping to do. So it's really about focusing your business and growing it within the program. You do have to have managerial and technical experience to the extent and the complexity needed to run the business. So you do have to show that you have some type of managerial experience, and certainly you want to include key personnel. If you have somebody that you've hired that ran an HR department for some big company, for example, you'll want to talk about including them on your management team. So you'll want to include that as well as supplemental, if you will, as in the full management team. But certainly you individually have to include your resume and show that you can really run this business. You do have to have some technical experience, but you don't necessarily have to carry all the licenses or whatever may be needed. Now, if there's a key license to the business and someone else in the company holds that key license, that could potentially run into an issue, because that could be a control issue. So if you have to carry that license in order to win work, but it's an individual outside of you that carries that license, that might cause you some issue. So just something to think about or keep in mind. Otherwise, it's sort of those last 4 bullets. Again, control is day-to-day operations. So you have the ability to hire people, fire people. You're the signatory on the checks. You set and have signed the policies for running the business and so on. Again, signatory, ability to commit the firm to contracts. And you have the ability to control budget and, again, name on the checks or signature on the checks. So again, things to keep in mind when looking at control. It is an important piece of this. What we have seen over the years, not only in the 8A program, but in other programs, the veteran program, the woman-owned program, programs where they are to be at least 51% owned by that type of individual, we've seen fraud, quite frankly, what we call in the government fraud, waste, and abuse. And we've had, the legal counsel of the government, called the Office of Inspector General, do lots of reports to look at fraudulent activity. And it's a real thing, and people try to get away with it. And there is real consequences to that, to doing that fraudulent type activity, to putting somebody who holds that disadvantaged status, putting them as a front for your business. If you put a person up as a front for your business and it is reviewed, and down the road you may win some contracts and then you're found to be fraudulently winning those contracts, there are real consequences. There are people who are sitting in jail right now for doing those things. So it isn't just a matter of paying restitution and potentially paying back hundreds to millions of dollars in contracts, but you may actually go to jail. So it is a real thing that we have to pay attention to. And it is something that is continually monitored while you're in the program. So, but if you have questions about any of these types of things, any other partners or things that you have, let us know. This is just that's the same thing I talked about earlier, kind of a summary of the type of business that you are. So kind of conversely, just some questions to think about if others potentially control your operation. So some litmus tests that you can kind of ask yourself. And it's sort of the opposite answer, if you will, to some of the things I showed earlier. So do you have the sufficient managerial experience to run this type of business? Can you prove that? Does the disadvantaged individual devote full time? If you don't, you're ineligible. However, there may be some certain circumstances to your business where you maybe have a small part-time job where you're doing some other things. So, but are you at least full-time in this business? And you're going to have to talk about that full-time. What do you do day to day to devote full-time? So those are some of the things you have to think about. Are your contractual arrangements, again, your articles of organization written? That does potentially allow a loophole or an open chance for a non-disadvantaged individual to take control of your firm. And I mentioned a couple of these already, but does that non-disadvantaged individual hold that critical license that you need? They can hold licenses, but is it one in particular, depending on the type of niche business that you're in? Does that non-disadvantaged individual supply the bonding? Is there a certain circumstance, again, where they could potentially be looked at as controlling the business? Maybe they've provided all the critical financing to the business. They've lent the business so much money, that the business owes too much money to this individual. Could they take control? So things just things to think about when you're applying. And again, as I've said, you can talk to us about your particular situation if you have something like that. When examining control, this is, again, just some other bullets. I know we did not supply you with the presentation, so these are all listed in the checklist as well. So when you go, I'm going to show you at the end where you're going to go to apply. There are some checklists with these things, but again, talk to us individually and we can talk about some of these particular issues that you could potentially run into. So to prove your management and technical experience, not only for you, but again, you'll want to include your key personnel. So you'll want to list basically your resumes or your CVs, if you will, which gives a snapshot of you and your key personnel. So what is your education level? Again, if you need certifications or licenses for this type of work, what are they? Your past experience. What do you have? What have you done, and what are you currently doing within this particular industry? If you do have other business interests or ownership in other businesses, you must include those. And if you actually devote any time to those, you need to include that information. So, if you do have if you're part-time employed by another business in a similar industry, or again, maybe you're a 10% owner or whatever it may be in another business, if that stuff comes up, you need to talk about what is it that you're doing, how much time, and what type of activities do you devote to that business. Character is another requirement that we will look at. So the SBA will run background checks on not only you, but any significant individuals that you supply in the business. It's primarily your owners, so any owner above 20%, again, plus you. Character is an important factor. So those key individuals in your business will be looked at. Potentially they'll run a credit report on you as well, and they're also, of course, going to always look at the federal list of debarred or suspended individuals, so they can do a history and a check on whether you may have been debarred, or you're on a list maybe for non-payment of a federal obligation, something like that. They can find out everything about you. So make sure that you know where you're at on certain things prior to applying, because again, this is a program that's based on you as an individual. So they are going to look at your history. So these are just some common circumstances that may impact your eligibility due to what they would call lack of character, is how they would call it on your application if you're denied. Any adverse information of some past criminal conduct. Certainly if you've violated any SBA regulations, or you have outstanding federal debt or obligations, that will potentially show lack of character. Being that said, if you have a federal obligation that you haven't paid, that is past due, but you do show that you have a payment plan in place, then you could still be eligible for the program. So no, I didn't make my federal obligation, but I've been working with the government to set up a plan to get it paid. They've accepted that plan, then you would be, essentially okay. But just don't think that those things disappear. There may be things in your history. The most common one that comes to mind, you may be, whatever, let's call it 50 years old now, but you maybe still owed some money from a student loan that's 25 years or 30 years ago, and you kind of let it fall by the wayside and it kind of went away. It doesn't go away. They will find those things. So you'll want to make sure that you're at least current on all your federal debt, or again, at least have a payment plan in place. Any prior criminal convictions or guilty pleas isn't necessarily a no-go. You can't be obviously currently incarcerated or on parole, but if you've had some kind of history, criminal history, you will have to supply a fingerprint card. They will do a check on that, and it's not an automatic disqualifier. They are reviewed on a case-by-case basis. It just depends on what it is. If you've essentially been convicted of a minor, some minor criminal activity, you paid your debt to society, and now you're on the other side of it, again, depending on what the severity of the situation, you'll probably be okay. Information. Okay, so that's pretty much it. Federal obligations I mentioned. All right, so that's character. Potential for success. So there's a couple of ways that they review potential for success, and this is the business itself. So now we're going to look at the business, and we're going to look at the financial capacity of your business, essentially, as well as sort of, the marketing side of it, if you will. So the overall financial condition of the company as compared to the financial condition of other businesses in your industry. So generally speaking, they're gonna, when they ask for your most recent, fiscal year or calendar year financial statements, and they're gonna review those. Again, they're gonna look at your assets and net worth, but they're gonna look at your access to capital, your credit worthiness. Has your business been profitable? Do you have the ability to have working capital, trends or patterns within the business? Let's say you've been in business 10 years. Have you been sustaining losses for those last 10 years? If so, why? So again, they're going to sort of look at the overall financial picture of the company. It isn't necessarily a deal breaker depending on what you're doing, but if they're worried that this is not a sustainable business in the long term, they may deny you, and they may maybe your debt outweighs your capital. So they're going to look at all those financial ratios and things like that, and it may potentially be an issue. And then what they would come back to you and say is, you need to get XYZ in order first, get some of that debt paid down, show more profitability in this particular area, whatever it may be, and then you could always look at maybe reapplying. But again, those are generally what they're going to look at. Bonding capability, even if you're a construction company and you've got bad credit or low credit and you can't get bonded, you have to be able to bond to do federal work. So that, again, could potentially be a deal breaker. So other factors that they look at, so again, I mentioned first and foremost, they're looking at your financials. So proof of that 2 years of operations based on those financials that you turned in for the last prior 2 years. They're also going to look at 2 through 6, but those are also things that you may want to look at if you're going to submit a waiver if you don't meet the 2 years of operation. So you need to meet all these criteria, but at the very least, if you can't meet number 1 and you're going to apply for a waiver, you really need to make sure that you meet the others, substantially. Because again, I mentioned if you haven't been in business, but you can show years and years of experience in that particular industry, then you may be able to apply for the waiver. So again, I already mentioned they're going to look at your financial capabilities and stability. So do you have access to capital? You know, what is your financial and credit performance, bonding capacity? Do you have manageable debt, or is your debt so upside down that it's going to take you a while to get outside of that debt? Because keep in mind, really this program is to be awarded government contracts. You need to be able to financially commit yourself if you are going to pursue potentially large government contracts. Do you have a sustainable operation, and do you have the financial capacity to be able to meet the obligation of that contract? I won't really get into it too heavily right here, but depending on the contract, you may have to buy inventory, you may have to hire people up front, depending on the size of the contract and so on. So they need to know that you can meet that obligation to be able to, you know, start that contract before you might get paid on that contract. So those are some of the kind of the pieces that come together when looking at certifying you into the program. Again, I mentioned managerial and technical capabilities, so you need to show via your resume and your narrative that you have managerial and or technical capability. Record of performance. So these last two are kind of have to do with your business and how you've done and what has been your record of performance on your work. So do you have the qualifications and ability to perform on federal contracts? So you can show other types of contracts or other type of past performance that you have, and how have you performed on those contracts? What have been the size of those contracts and so on? And then level of contract support, including some type of supporting evidence and minimal market research that there is business in your industry in government contracting. You know, so why do you want to be 8A certified? And incidentally, and I mentioned this earlier, and I ran into this early on in my career and didn't realize. So that proof of 2 years of operation, verified by 2 years of tax returns. However, if you have not generated any revenue, the 2-year rule cannot be waived. So you do have to show some revenue. You've had to show that you have some past performance and you have had some work in your business. There isn't necessarily a dollar threshold. Kind of depends on your industry. So, you know, there is, again, no dollar amount, but you do have to have some revenue coming in. So if you're going to submit the waiver for the 2-year rule, this is just sort of a bulleted list of kind of things I've already mentioned. So you need to show your resume, you need to show your past experience in that particular industry. Do you have substantial and demonstrated experience in that particular industry? Have you managed large projects, for example? If you're in the construction world, were you maybe a project manager for 15 years for another company? You manage large multi-million-dollar contracts for them and so on. Or again, maybe you have that technical expertise as well that you've utilized in your past work experience. You still have to show you have that adequate capital to carry out your business plan. So if you say you want the big $10 million construction contracts, you know, building tall buildings or whatever it may be, but you got to be able to show bonding and the ability to, you know, have access to capital in order to do so. Again, you have to have a record of successful performance on contracts. It can be non-governmental sources as well in your primary industry. So you have to show you have some work. Again, because that's the revenue piece. You have to have some revenue in order to apply for the waiver. And then the applicant has to demonstrate its ability to timely obtain personnel, facilities, equipment, and so on. So again, that goes back to, do you have sources for equipment, for you know, resources within your industry and within your business to perform on contracts? And again, these are the types of things you would put in your narrative. So what makes you ineligible? You can't be a broker. So you have to actually, in essence, be able to take possession, they call it, or supply something directly. So you can't be a broker. Debarred or suspended individuals, and you can't be a nonprofit. So you must be a for-profit individual. Franchises are looked at kind of on an individual basis. It depends on the franchise agreement that you have in place with that franchisor. But certainly potentially franchises are allowed. You can only participate once, so you cannot use your disadvantaged status to apply in the future for either another business or for someone else's business. So you as John Doe can only apply one time. And so again, you can't use your disadvantaged status to either start another business or to qualify someone else's business, essentially. So that's pretty much eligibility. So again, you can see there's a lot to being eligible, and there's a lot of potential nuances. So again, we can talk to you about your individual circumstance if it applies. For the remainder of the time, this part will go a little bit quicker. We're just going to talk about a few of the benefits to the program. These may be some of the things you're already familiar with just because you're on today and you're interested in this program. So once you get into the program, again, I mentioned we do a really lengthy orientation with you to talk about all the, not only compliance and what you have to do to comply in the program, but really how we work together on your business development efforts to grow your business. We will do some initial market research for you. Certainly your business plan should include and will include agencies or types of work that you've already started to target as part of your strategy for applying to the program. So we'll cover your business plan, and then I will also do, or the PTAC will work to do some initial market research to kind of help you sort of, create some of your kind of short-term goals within some of the agencies that you may have identified that you want to work with. The general benefits throughout the term that you're in the program. First and foremost, that procurement assistance is always usually number one for everybody. It's getting access to those direct 8A sole source awards. And we do that in lots of different ways. We actually work with the 8A firms directly with contracting agencies. So we work on your behalf with those agencies that you've identified. So you might do the initial relationship building, and then we can come in and help you. Again, I mentioned market research. So whether we do initial market research or we help you run market research throughout the year to see, where things are going, how your business is evolving. At various times throughout the year, now with COVID and some of the things that we're dealing with, some of these one-on-one meetings with agencies are going to be, that's going to look different as we go into the future. But generally speaking, throughout the year, we may set up meetings or one-on-ones, or maybe now it'll be Zoom meetings with some of the agencies. So a lot of the agencies throughout the year will set aside days or times for 8A firms to come in and give a capabilities briefing, or give a short elevator pitch about what you do. So we would advise you of those, and then we would bring you in for those. The Mentor Protege program and joint ventures. So these are strategic teaming type arrangements that you'll be eligible for. I'm going to talk a little bit about those as well in a second. Business and mentoring counseling. So SBA has access to not only our resource partners that we currently have through PTAC and their organization, the Nebraska Business Development Center, as well as SCORE. We have various agencies that and groups and organizations that we work with to assist you with, some gaps you may have or business needs that you may have. But we also, throughout the year, SBA will actually contract with other for-profit companies to provide training as well. So you'll see once you're in the program, I will send out correspondence with you saying that we have someone on board who can help with, whatever, website development, pricing policies, that kind of thing. So you get those throughout your 9 years. Various types of training again. the federal surplus property program. That's actually, depending on the type of business you're in, the surplus property program is a very lucrative opportunity, only available to nonprofits essentially, and 8A firms, 8A certified firms. It is being opened up to veteran-owned businesses, so the regulation is changing a little to include veteran-owned for-profit businesses to have access. But the federal surplus property program is massive. Anytime the government buys or leases equipment, and for the life of a job or a project, once that project's done, we may put that property into surplus, and you essentially have access to that surplus property. So, you know, especially if you're in a construction field where, you know, equipment is very expensive, you can sometimes get equipment, you know, pennies on the dollar, really. So I'll tell you all about the surplus property program. It's how you access it in the state of Nebraska and so on as part of your orientation, but it is really a great program as well. Also, if you happen to be in construction, we have surety bonding. So if you do struggle a little bit to get bonding and you have some issues with getting bonding, we have a surety bonding program. And then again, throughout the year, we have all types of management and technical assistance that we provide depending on the topic, you know, depending on what we're doing at the time. So you'll always be made aware of those particular opportunities. The contracting benefits, again, are probably the most important, honestly, to most small businesses. How do I get access to those 8A contracts? So sole source awards. The 8A program is the only program that you can receive a sole source award without it being competed first. So if a contracting agency knows about you, they decide they like you, you know, based on either, you know, talking with you or researching you, they do not have to put that opportunity out for bid. They can come directly to SBA and sole source direct award that contract to you with a ceiling of $4 million. So that's only contracts up to $4 million. If it's over $4 million, but they still want it to go to an 8A firm, they will put it out as an 8A set aside, and then you can bid on it against other 8As. So, but again, sole source contracts, again, in your orientation, we cover all the nuances to sole source contracts, but again, that's probably, I will say, honestly, the number one, you know, sort of benefit of this program, if you will. And then you can also form 8A approved joint ventures, and I'll talk about that a little bit. Normally, you know, in my presentation on the 8A program, I would talk about the Mentor Protege program as a real benefit, and it quite frankly is a huge benefit. If done right, the SBA Mentor Protege program can be a very important tool for you in creating strategic partnerships to help you win contracts. You know, if you're a very small business and you want to compete with the big boys someday, sometimes that leap from step 1 to step 10 is very hard to do on your own. So this is a way for you to grow your experience, grow your capacity by teaming strategically with either another small business or a large business who you can take on as a mentor, and you can bring in their capacity, their infrastructure to help you win those bigger contracts. So it really can, again, if it's done right, it can really be a win-win for both parties. So we'll talk a little bit about that. I guess the comment I was going to make, though, is it is a benefit to the 8A program and to 8A certified firms, but a few years ago now, I guess it's been maybe 3 years ago, the SBA did open up the Mentor Protege program to all small businesses. So this is huge for the small business community. So even if you decide at the end of this presentation the 8A program is not for you, but you are a small business and you do still want to compete on federal contracts, you may want to consider the Mentor Protege program as, again, a way to grow your business. So something to keep in mind. Just wanted to show you an example of, this is actually from the old system, the FBO.gov. Won't get too heavy into this for this particular presentation, but for those of you who know where to find contract opportunities, Any contract opportunity over $25,000 by law must be put out in a public forum for you to find. It's been switched to beta.sam.gov. So beta.sam is housing lots of federal contracting data, but contract opportunities is also one of them. And so if you were going to look for an opportunity, again, this is going to be part of your business development strategy. We would actually go over this and talk about at what point do you look at these. They may put something out, a contracting agency may put something out for initial market research, what they call sources sought. So as an 8A firm, we may want to look at that opportunity and figure out how do we get that opportunity for you. Or they may have already gone a little further down the path and put this out for actual bid. So now you have to bid on it via an RFP process and it's out for solicitation. What you're going to do at that point is, and I'm sorry, depending on the size of your screen, you may not be able to see this, but in the kind of bar onto the right-hand side that I did in yellow, it'll tell you the set aside, and this is a competitive 8A. So that means, one, it's over $4 million because it's now competitive, so it's not a sole source opportunity, but it's only for 8A certified firms to bid. So you'll want to look for those as well. And incidentally, you may want to, as you're putting your initial business plan together, you may want to look for some competitive 8As in your industry to see what's been put out for bid in the 8A program within your particular industry or NAICS code. Each bidding opportunity has a NAICS code associated, as it shows on here. This is one for a construction code. So again, you could do some research as well and see what's been put out for competitive 8A bid. So another opportunity to look for set-asides, or even at least at the sources sought level, get your name known, get yourself in front of the agencies so that they know you're an 8A firm who could potentially bid on their opportunity. So again, the Mentor Protege program, I think I'm only going to give you a quick, just a really honest to God 3-minute down and dirty about it. But I do think we're planning to maybe do some webinars in the future where we just devote the entire time talking about strategies for Mentor Protege and joint ventures. So maybe look for that in the future. But again, just to give you an idea, the Mentor Protege program, again, not only open to 8A firms anymore, it's now open to all small businesses. But again, it can be a really big sort of win-win for both sides. It again provides you with capacity that you may not otherwise have to compete. But then on the flip side, it provides the large business with a small business that maybe can provide them help in meeting their goals to the agency, provides them subcontracting capacity they might not have, or it may even gives them access, that large mentor access to small business set-asides that they would have not otherwise had access to. So again, if managed and handled right, it really can be a win-win for both sides. But under the 8A program, or under the 8A Mentor Protege program, the last bullet in red, we will approve your 8A joint ventures under that program. So you have a mentor, you're the protege, you have a mentor, you guys come together, you form a formal mentor protege agreement, which is your overarching agreement that you're going to do work together. But for each individual contract that you pursue, you form a joint venture to pursue that work, where you really do create what we call a separate new legal entity, where you combine forces, so to speak, in order to pursue that contract. So the government looks at both of you in terms of capacity, experience, and evaluate you together in terms of whether or not they award that contract or not. So just a list of the things. This is actually right out of the regulation on sort of what a joint venture looks like. Again, we'll do a future class where we'll talk about the nuances of these 8A joint ventures. But at least this is an opportunity, and I should say, It isn't just a strategy under Mentor Protege. Under the Mentor Protege program, you form a joint venture with your large business mentor. You're only going to go into the Mentor Protege program if you find a large business that you want to build that relationship with. But you can certainly form joint ventures on your own with other small businesses. An 8A approved joint venture just means you have to have the majority ownership in the joint venture. But you have an 8A participant, and you have another small business, you guys can come together as well, join forces under that new legal entity to pursue 8A contracts. So as long as you're each small, and again, one's 8A, you could come together for a joint venture to pursue an 8A contract. So that's essentially what this says. Again, if you get certified, we'll talk all about joint ventures under the 8A program in your orientation, because there are some performance of work stipulations and things that the 8A company has to do. But once you're in, we would talk about that as well. So what is expected of you? I've kind of mentioned some of these things throughout the presentation, but you have to self-market. So again, you are in no way guaranteed a contract. You still have to get yourself out there and self-market yourself to the agencies. We will work with you to put a good solid business plan together, but then you have to market that business plan. I mentioned earlier, you'll have to do annual reviews or annual updates to make sure you're still in compliance with the program, make sure you're still eligible. And then again, we look at if there's any changes or updates to your business plan. You always have to be an open book, quite honestly. If you don't want to be an open book and you're leery of that, it honestly might not be the program for you, because you have to be able to give SBA access to your company records at any given time, depending on the situation. You also have to inform SBA of any changes that you may make to the business. So any changes in structure, ownership have to be approved by SBA. So it really is a true partnership with SBA. Part of that annual review is resubmitting year-end financial statements and tax returns every year. So you're gonna have to submit those things and certify every single year. You will have to participate in business development trainings and that kind of thing. They're actually going to start making some of those things mandatory. So you will have to take the time and get involved in some of the training activities. But most of them are really, really good. Actually, we really get some good contractors in who provide some really good training. You're going to always have to stay current on your financial obligations, obviously. Make sure you're paying your taxes every year. And then we work with you to make sure all of your records and all of the databases out there are updated and current throughout the year. So there's a lot of work on your end. You don't just put all the work into the certification, then it sort of just comes easy after that. It is a program that takes a lot of work. But as I mentioned earlier, the amount of work you put into it could potentially really pay off for you in the end and could really benefit you in the end. So, again, you get out of it as much as you put into it. So application process, I just kind of created a little 7-step, but you'll definitely want to work with PTAC as you decide to start applying. That would be my advice. You certainly can try this process on your own, but it's going to be a lot more efficient. You're going to pull a lot less of your hair out if you utilize PTAC's help. But of course, everything we've talked about, making sure you're eligible, getting your application put together, working with PTAC on that if you can. And then you'll need to get yourself registered in SAM. So if you're not already registered in the SAM database and you have no idea what that is, because we didn't cover it here, you definitely want to work with PTAC to get yourself registered. The SAM.gov website is for any business who wants to do work with the government. Essentially, it's a vendor website that you have to get registered in. So you'll have to be registered in that and have an active record prior to applying. Then you will apply through the Certify system on SBA's website. So that's the step number 4. There's the link. I'm going to show it to you again, but certify.sbi.gov is where you'll go to actually submit your application. So that's kind of the steps there. Once you go to Certify, I included the checklist as part of the handouts. So if you didn't or can't, for whatever reason, get the checklist downloaded, when you go to the Certify site, you'll see actually for the checklist for all the programs that you apply to, And the 8A Business Development Program checklist is there. So you can download it there and you can kind of go through every single section of it to make sure that you've included all the documentation. In the essence of time, I'm going to end. I kind of talked too much, so I don't want to. The next sort of 3 or 4 slides are just snapshots really of the checklist. So big thing is just make sure you get the checklist and literally go down each one and make sure you've included documentation. I've talked about most of this documentation throughout, but again, if you have questions about it, email me. You can email Veronica. We can talk to you about exactly what it is you need to include. But that's really what this whole thing is. So again, it goes into, ownership. Here's all the things you need to prove ownership. Then you get to the next section on control. Here's the things you need to prove control, and so on. Potential for success. Again, here's all the things you need to show potential for success. Again, as I mentioned, this is all in the checklist. Character section. Here's the things you need to make sure you include to prove good character. And then if, as an individual, here's the things you need to include. So again, just going, honestly, they've really done a good job in the last couple of years since Certify came into existence. They've done a much better job of including a really thorough checklist on exactly what you need. So you'll just want to go through that. And how are you screened? So they're going to take all of those documents that you've included. First of all, they're going to make sure everything's signed, everything's dated, and so on. They're going to do some initial screening things as well to make sure things make sense. So again, based on that checklist of whatever that is, 50 documents, if you have a W-2 that you have to submit for income, but then you have your tax document over here and it has a different income, or you've included something that doesn't match, these are going to be little things that are going to be red flags. So first of all, just make sure everything matches. And there's no sort of question marks of how things don't match. Little things like, again, making sure you're registered in SAM, so they're going to go out right away and make sure you're registered. One of the big pieces as well that I see a lot on applications that are returned is the NAICS code that you identified. So you said, well, I'm going to apply under this NAICS code, this industry code, but then when they go to start looking at all the documents of your business, in fact, your business is completely something else. So they don't match up. So, those are the types of things that they're going to look at. Again, any sort of aging documents or a running list of, so if you apply in June, they're still going to want to look at a current year-to-date financial statement for that current year. They're going to look at the dates again, make sure things aren't old. Profit and loss statements and balance sheets, those are the financials that you have to include. Again, I told you they're going to be looking at the financial background of the firm as well. So are your payables and receivables significantly old? Again, do you have assets? How are they recorded? If you have assets that you didn't include, and then again, they go to do research on you and they find out you own all this property somewhere, for example, that's going to hold up the process. So things like that. Once you file your application and certify, and again, it's going to be an initial screening. Let me jump to this slide first. So when you first get everything submitted, you're going to be in the screening stage. Within 15 days of that initial application, you're going to hear something back that they've received your application and they're going to be looking through it. And that could potentially go back and forth. Once they finally feel like they have everything after that process, then they're going to put your application into processing. Once your application goes into processing, they have essentially by law 90 days to complete your application. Now, again, depending on people on the call here, if you say, well, I know it takes more than 90 days, I've talked to people, it never takes 90 days. That's probably true. Most applications average 6 months to 9 months. And that's because they have to go back and forth in the initial process to make sure that you have everything. So you may not, when they say 90 days to process your application, that's once they receive what they think is a complete application. So again, some of the things I mentioned earlier, you submitted information on 2 assets you own. They do research, they find out you have 7 assets, whatever it may be. They're going to have to come back to you and say, okay, we found this, you haven't submitted all the required documentation, and so on. So those are the kind of things that can hold up the process. But what's important is from the data processing, it's 90 days. Depending on the, if you're certified or you're approved at that point, great, you're approved and you move forward. Then you become a client of the local district office, if you will. So this slide here, it's not really important for you to know this part other than just to know that your application does not come to the local district office. When you apply through the Certify system, it goes to an office, certifying office in San Francisco. The district office does not get involved in your application at all. So, but once you are approved, they will send us your information, and then you do become a client of the local district office for, for that 9-year program. But up until that point, your back and forth via Certify will be with the application, the certifying office. They will tell you along the way if you're approved, you come here. If you're denied for different reasons, you have different mandatory waiting periods for reapplication. So if you're declined for some deficiency, so if they've kind of gone back and forth, or they've come back to you and said, of the 50 things you submitted, we're missing 30 of them, they will decline you for deficiency, meaning you just haven't turned in all the documentation, and they'll give you a very nice itemized list of the things that you haven't included. At that point, you have 15 days to resubmit the information. So basically, you see the list of things you were deficient, you can resubmit right away those deficient items. Once you submit those items and they re-look at it again, and they still decline you after you resubmitted whatever those deficiencies, you then have 45 days from the day of the decline. And that's really important because you need to know there's a clock ticking in that 40-day time period. You can either resubmit or you can appeal. So I don't really talk about the appeal process on here, but you have a 45-day window depending on why you were declined to either reapply and fix whatever the issue was, or if you feel like they were wrong on their end, you can appeal, and you will receive that information at the denial of what your due process is as an applicant. But if you within that either 15-day window or 45-day window, if you do not, for whatever reason, you missed it, you didn't see the email, or you got busy and you missed the deadline, then you might have to wait a full year. So it's just important to know that, because depending on the timing, if you got behind or whatever reason, but you could have submitted those changes pretty easily, well, now you've missed the timeline and you do have to wait the full year. As well, if you're declined after the 45-day window, you would have to wait another 12 months this year. So you have 2 reasons why you might have to wait a full year, which is okay. I mean, maybe what you were declined for made sense. You realize you didn't meet a particular criteria, but within this year, things are going to change in your business. You're going to grow. You're going to do other things. And then you may be ready and set to apply in a year. So you can always reapply if things change or get better in that particular area. This is this website again where you go, certified.sba.gov is where you'll apply. That checklist is in this section under prepare. You'll want to create a login as well. Once you log in, and you've created a login for you as an individual, you've tied that to your business, and once you've logged in, there is a section in there called the knowledge base, certified knowledge base. There is an enormous amount of information out there about the application process. So I've included the quick start guide, I think is one of the handouts. That's kind of a down and dirty, 20-page, here's how you apply. But there's some webinars that the certifying office did, and they've included the recordings. There's some other tips and documents that can help you for applying. If you have questions about the application process within Certify, or something is, certainly issues happen with these databases, I kind of circled down in the lower right-hand corner, you can email help@certify.sba.gov as well. Usually within 24 hours, someone will respond to your question. And that's it. I wanted to try to leave 15 minutes for a little Q&A at the end. So this is my contact information. Please feel free to reach out if you have questions. Here, what I will tell you, and I'm hoping I'm not speaking out of line. I'm sure Veronica will come in and talk as well. Generally speaking, at the application level, I can certainly help with high-level questions and high-level, eligibility type questions, or compliance. How do I interpret something I read in the regulation, that kind of thing. But once you get to where you're really down and dirty into the application process, you'll really want to work with PTAC on the more specifics of your application. Generally speaking, the SBA district office stays out of the true detail of the application, because once you're in the program, you do become a client of the local office. So we really leave the hands-on application side to the PTAC. So, but anyway, that's my contact information if you do have any high-level questions. And I guess I'll turn it back over to Veronica.
Thank you, Lisa. Very good presentation. And as you mentioned, yes, please let us know if you do have any questions about how to proceed or application or anything related to any kind of certifications. Our consultants will be more than happy to sit down with you over Zoom and talk to you about any of those questions that you might have. Now, we do have some questions in the pane, so I will address those, Lisa. I mean, we will both address those. I will read those.
Sounds good.
So here's a scenario. I own my own business 100%, and I am the president. I am not the highest paid per se, but I do distributions that could absolutely make me the highest paid. Would that still work?
Yes. So generally speaking, yes. So a short answer is yes. It would depend. We'd have to look at how you take that distribution. But yes, any distributions that you take out of the business and they're showed as income, then yes, that would be counted as part of your income if you're not using it in any other manner. So generally speaking, yes.
But even if the owner is not the highest paid, that sometimes can be acceptable, correct?
Correct, right. So yes, so yeah, I guess the extent of that answer is if you don't do that, or there's some nuance that you take that distribution and it still doesn't make you the highest paid, yes, as I mentioned earlier and as Veronica said, there are certain circumstances, if there's good sufficient reason as to why you're not the highest paid, absolutely that's not a complete disapproval. So yeah, if there's a good reason that you need to pay other people a higher salary for a reason, that's certainly permissible and something they will review.
Thank you. And here's another question. I have a for-profit business, but recently started a nonprofit. Will that make a difference?
Well, it won't if the for-profit obviously is the one applying for the program. So your nonprofit would be kept separate, and you would then be applying as the for-profit. And so then we would just review everything you do under the for-profit part of the business, and you would have to meet the criteria. So no, not as anything that I can think of off the top of my head, there would be any issues. Again, only the for-profit side has to be the business, and the individual owning it is where the criteria falls. So as long as you do that, there should be no reason why you can't do that.
Would that play into the business, not association, but there's another word.
The affiliation?
Affiliation, thank you.
No, I don't think it would. I don't think anything under the nonprofit would apply to the affiliation. The only thing that may have applicability is if your nonprofit and your for-profit have a common board member for any reason, that could potentially be an issue. But generally speaking, I'm just trying to think through my head on the regulation. I can't see of any reason that that would be a problem. But if you do decide you want to apply, I would suggest you talk to us offline about that. We could do a little bit more digging depending on your situation. I guess it would mostly be dependent on where the control comes and what other individuals might be in, have their hands in both sides. But if they don't, if you're just 100% owner and you have these two, you have one for-profit and one nonprofit, you shouldn't have any problem under that just simple scenario.
Okay, here's another question that just came in. When I apply for the program, will I be given a contact at my local SBA office?
Not when you apply, no. So when you apply, all of your correspondence will be with an individual via the Certify system. So you will be assigned to an individual out of the Office of Certification that I mentioned, which is in San Francisco. You'll be assigned to that person via Certify. Most of your correspondence will occur via the Certify system. That's how they log the communication between you and stamp the time and date and all of that. Now, being that said, that person may email you offline because they need you to submit a document and maybe it wouldn't attach to Certify for some reason, and they may email you and say, just email me the document. And so you may have some email correspondence. But generally speaking, you will work with a person out of the San Francisco eligibility office via the Certify platform. You will not work with someone out of the local district office until you're certified. Once you're certified, then you get moved, so to speak, to the local office and you'll work with that person then.
Okay, another question. Does the program cost?
Oh, great question. No. So no, so let me give you a caveat on that. Anything that you do with small business programs with the federal government will never cost you anything. So we will never charge you for any of our programs. Being that said, there are some for-profit companies who have built businesses around helping small businesses get certified. Generally speaking, we do not recommend those, which we can't anyway as a federal agency. I can't recommend any for-profit business assistance from that standpoint. But there are some people who just don't want to deal with it. And maybe you don't have a relationship with your PTAC, which incidentally, PTAC, as Veronica will tell you, will help you with this process at no charge as well. But there are some groups, some for-profit groups out there that may charge you to help you apply, and you individually get to decide if you think that that assistance is of benefit. I know some certified firms who have used some of these companies and have liked paying them high amounts of money to help them because they just took it over and they didn't have to do it because they're too busy working in their business. So that's an option. But in terms of direct application with us, if you apply on your own or use a partner organization of SBA like the PTAC, you will not get charged any fee to apply.
And I also want to say that all of our services, our PTAC services, are free. And I would add to what Lisa said. If you do go with a third party for-profit company, you will still have to do the work because you will have to supply to them all of the documentation that is necessary. So there will be still time that you'll have to dedicate and money on top of that. So again, that is your business decision, like Lisa said, but there are free options. Okay, another question. If I want to apply only to the woman's owned small business program, is that at the local office?
No, so it's the same thing. So you also apply for that program online. It is a very similar portal to Certify. For whatever reason, SBA couldn't, by the time we needed to meet the deadline in the regulation for the certification, which is October 15th, they couldn't get for whatever reason, the platform built into the current Certify system where you apply for 8A. So if you apply as of now in the woman-owned program, you have to go to the beta Certify system. So it's beta.certify.sba.gov, but it will look very similar and the application process is very similar. And also where it goes. So same thing. You're not going to go to San Francisco, though. That's only 8A. You'll actually go to a woman-owned certification office in Washington, D.C. So you will not go through the local office. And also, once you're in, it's not the same as 8A. So the 8A program, by regulation, only the 8A program certified people get moved to the district office for assistance. The woman-owned program, certainly you can come to us for assistance. You can go to PTAC for assistance, but you aren't necessarily, the program isn't managed the same way. 8A is a 9-year program. It's got a finite period that you're in it. Woman-owned, I mean, you could stay certified woman-owned for, indefinitely, as long as nothing changed in your business. So it's a little different, in terms of maneuvering the program. But the application itself does go through the beta.certify system, and that does go to an office in DC for application and review.
And Lisa, do you want to elaborate what was the October 15th deadline for?
Yeah, so up until October 15th, the woman-owned, what we call the woman-owned certification was and currently still is a self-certification. So there is in the current Certify system where you apply for 8A, you would upload documents, and there's a checklist out there. So you would upload documents, and essentially you, by submitting those documents, you are saying that you are what you say you are. So I am a woman-owned business. Here's all the documents I'm supposed to submit, and they just sit, and they're housed in a repository. And you're not actually certified. That's as far as it goes. So you've self-certified yourself to be woman-owned. On October 15th, the law changes. On October 15th, it does become a full certification. So then again, as I mentioned, all of those documents you have to upload into the other new system, the beta Certify system, and you actually are reviewed by SBA officials, and you are stamped, if you will, certified. Based on a review of those documents. So it's going from a self-certification to a full SBA certification on October 15th. So if you're in the Certify system as a self-certified woman-owned business on October 15th, you'll have to now take those documents and put them into the other system to be reviewed to be actually certified. So I hope that makes sense.
Would you recommend everybody to wait until after the October 15th to apply?
Well, it depends on what really answers that question is, it depends on what you want to bid on. So if you don't need to use that certification till October 15th, meaning you don't plan on bidding on anything, I would hold off. You don't necessarily need to do it now. You can wait until October 15th. However, being that said, the portal did open on July 15th. So you are allowed to start putting your documents into the beta system now. And I believe it is a first come, first serve basis. So they are going to look at applications starting on the 15th as they went into the system. So, if you want the certification, no question, I want to be certified, then I would say go ahead and start doing it now. You might as well get yourself in the queue, start working through the new system, because likely you're going to run into issues. So that way, if you're wanting to bid on something, in the near future, you've kind of already started the process. So I guess the short answer is, if you want to be certified, go ahead and start doing it now.
Okay, and the last question, can one business be certified in more than one category?
Yeah, that's a great question. Absolutely, you can. You could check all the boxes, all 5 socioeconomic categories you could potentially apply to. So you could get, they're not all certifications, obviously. Some are still self-certifications, but you could certainly be eligible for all 5, and therefore it just creates even that much more small business opportunity for you of types of contracts you can go after. So absolutely. And in fact, in our marketing webinar class that we do, we talk about that. If you check all 5 boxes, but the opportunity you bid on, let's say, was just a small business set aside, but yet you meet all those other criteria, that agency could take credit for awarding that small business set aside to you in all of those categories. So it just kind of provides you with more leverage, if you will, in terms of, you know, the agencies and what they can take credit for. So so there's a whole sort of thought process with that. But short answer is absolutely. If you are eligible for all of them, absolutely you should put yourself in all of them.
I think that's all the questions. Thank you, Lisa, for your time, and thank you everybody for attending today's event. Remember to find the list of all of our events on our website. And if you have questions, send us emails. We will be more than happy to help you out throughout any kind of processes with government contracting. You have a great rest of the day, and thank you again for everybody who attended.
Yep, thank you. Have a good day, everyone.